In this video, I want to take a look at copying hierarchies and the various tools we have available for that and the caveats to using them. One thing that will come up during rigging is that many structures are similar to one another, even if it's in nothing more than a left side, right side on something. For that reason, the ability to copy hierarchies is a big time saver, rather than, of course, having to build a hierarchy and then build pretty much the same thing again from scratch. So here you can see I've got a little hierarchy of nulls, and the third null here has got a little hierarchy of bones that belongs to it. If I just clone a single null, say the first one here, then all I get is just that one item cloned. Its hierarchy does not copy with it. Whereas for an item that has bones under it, here, if I clone that, then when it clones, it also creates a clone of the bones that belong to it. Of course, if, however, I select a single bone and I clone that, then all I get is a single clone of that one bone. I don't get a clone of its child bones. So that's simple cloning, but what we're going to really want to be talking about here, as I said, is cloning hierarchies. So we saw how a bone hierarchy will copy when the object that is the parent of that bone hierarchy is cloned singularly. But in terms of hierarchy, you'll notice that we have a couple of tools dotted about. For instance, we have the clone hierarchy button here, the mirror hierarchy button here. If we look in the rig tools though, and the bone edit tools, what we will see is that there are some specific tools for working just with bone hierarchies, copy hierarchy and mirror hierarchy. These are bone only tools. They won't work on other object types. So let's go back to this simple one here, clone hierarchy. All you do is click it and look what you get. You get a fully cloned hierarchy. Pretty nice and simple and straightforward. Let's have a look at mirror hierarchy. If we click that, then we get a panel with a whole bunch of different options. The item that we want to mirror around, which denotes the point in space where the origin of mirroring occurs. If we select none, then it just happens around the 0. We have also the axis, which we wish to mirror across, X, Y, or Z. If we want to parent the newly mirrored hierarchy to something, in this case I'll select none, and we can add a renaming as well, such as a prefix, suffix, or no renaming. The clone prefix or suffix, then of course we have some options to choose from. We're not able to just type and enter our own, we pick one of these. And we have this option rename original, which will give a counter name to the original hierarchy that we had. So let's do all of that, hit OK and see what we get. Well, there we are, mirrored around the 0, which is just here as it happens. You'll see that I chose left as my prefix and the original has been renamed right, so that's all nice and handy. However, there is something to notice with the way that Lightwave performs this hierarchy mirroring. It all looks wonderful and perfect, but if I switch to the scale tool, what I can see is that I'm at -1 on the X. Basically, all that mirror hierarchy does, apart from its renaming options, is to simply do a clone hierarchy and then scale the thing by -1 on whatever axis we were mirroring across. This is an important thing to notice for a couple of reasons. First off, bones. If you are mirroring a hierarchy of bones in this way, you're stuffed. The reason why, as we will later see when we look at bones in more detail, is that when bones are bound to a mesh, they need to be done so at a scale of 1. This bone and these bones might indeed have a scale of 1, but that's only because they are within their parent space, which has been negatively scaled. These will not bind to a mesh properly, so this method is no good for bone. Second of all, any items below in the hierarchy, even though they themselves are not scaled, their parent space has been scaled. Therefore, if we're trying to do some sort of constraining of things, that can give us problems. Let me, for instance, take this green null here, and I'm going to constrain it rotationally to the opposing mirrored green null like this. This of course has no bearing on positional constraints. It is the rotational constraint where it matters, because you'll notice that what happens is, because of the inverted space of the parent, I get an inverted constraint. The way to get around this is to use the world mode like this. What you then wind up with is something that works in this fashion and of course respects the way that the other one is in fact turning. However, once we see how same as item works, the difference between world mode and non-world mode, we can begin to understand that in certain situations that might cause us problems because we want to use what we would call a local axis or value copy method of constraint, only we can't do it because we have to use the world mode and so on, when we do not actually want a world type constraint to be happening. As I say, don't worry about that too much at the minute, but perhaps think back on this issue when we're going through same as item. Or, of course, many of the other constraints that exist and the peculiarities of exactly how they work. As such, it means that this mirror hierarchy tool is of very limited use whilst rigging, because what you will get is you will get a hierarchy that, although looks-wise is properly mirrored, in the way that it needs to function and behave because its ultimate parent space is negatively scaled, you wind up with certain problems. So let's take a look at the bone ones then, and what I'll do for this is I'll just make some kind of pose here on my bones. Looks all right to me, and we'll just come over to the bone tools instead. Now, the copy hierarchy, no different, absolutely identical to the copy hierarchy we already saw. In fact, if all you're wanting to do is copy a hierarchy, then it makes no difference whether you use the bone one to copy a hierarchy of bones or the standard one that we just saw. The only difference that you will see when you click the bone one is that you get these different options for renaming, which can be handy. What you will also notice with the bone one is that you have these options for copying goals or target items. Now that is handy to an extent, because in this way you're not just cloning the hierarchy itself, you're actually cloning the rigging along with it. The slight downside to this is that unfortunately it hasn't been updated to take account of poles, so if you've got pole items, those can't be cloned along with. And also, once you start to see some of the creative ways in which we use the constraints and those reference different things, that lot won't copy properly either, and you'll just have to go and set these things back up manually anyway. As such, it's generally best to treat these tools just as simple hierarchy cloning tools and not rig cloning tools. You will pretty much have to set up the rig or the similar rig again on the cloned hierarchy. Let's have a look at the mirror hierarchy for bones. Again, we get a very similar set of options with renaming and so on. But of course we get axis to decide around which axis we want the mirroring to occur, and again we can set a center position for that. In this case I'm going to make it the Y. I'll just add a little prefix of 2- and hit OK. What do we notice here? Well, when using the bone hierarchy mirror tool, what we don't get is negative scaling. As I already said, that is a bad thing. You don't scale bones. They won't work properly with meshes afterwards. As such, the bone mirror tool does not do a rescaling. It does an actual proper mirror, as in it reorients the items so as they are properly mirrored of the original chain. Sadly, you can't use this tool on nulls. If you had a chain of nulls that you wanted to mirror without the scaling, you can't just use the bone version. It will just say, sorry, this is not a bone. But when it does come to mirroring bone setups, it's a very nice, quick, easy way to do it, as well as being reliable and giving you the proper coordinates and alignments that you need. It will even work if you have pivot recorded things. So let me say I take these 3 bones here and I just record their pivot rotations. And I come to the top one here and I once again go to mirror it. What you'll see is that I still get a proper mirroring. You'll notice that the pivot recording hasn't copied. These have just gone back to an unrecorded state essentially, but of course you can just re-record their pivots as well. So there we have it. Hierarchy cloning and mirroring. Useful in some situations, but also somewhat limited in the amount of functionality that you get out of the cloning. Sometimes when you're just initially setting things up, when you're laying out items, it can be a nice quick way to just get the other side or get a clone set or whatnot. But when you're getting into actual full rigs, you pretty much can't get away with getting much out of them, unless you have just got a simple target behavior or a simple, one goal behavior on bones. Then of course you can get away with using that tool to clone the actual rig itself.